Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, in a silent maneuver, for the most part, I hadn't heard much of this. Someone sent this to my Twitter feed, and thank you very much. Guys, please send your content. It's like I guess I feel like I cast out a net into this kind of digital ether. And it's like a wavelength. And there's some people from a conceptual standpoint, from a mental standpoint, aggregate around that particular wavelength. And clearly there has to be something in me that's there in you for you to the very least say, he makes sense. I like what he's saying. Or I don't still like what he's saying in this moment, but overall, I dig what he's saying. I think he's being earnest. So if you guys see something, feel free to send it. Feel free to send it. I guess my point is, there has to be something in me that's similar to something in you for you to even like this channel. And so it's like my wife buying me clothes. She does an awesome job at buying me clothes when she's out. Like if she's like, I like this, I think you'll like this too. Our sense of taste is extremely similar. I'm saying similar to that. It's like our sense of taste, our perspective of things has to be to some degree similar if you're even liking my channel. So if you see something that piques your interest, send it. Definitely send it. It will be appreciated. In a few days ago, in something that was for all intents and purposes almost went by without peaking or hitting the radar, Republicans passed H.R. 620. They're calling it, in this Orwellian terms, the ADA Education and Reform Act. Yes, it reforms it. It fucks it up. It makes it more difficult for people to deal with things related to the Americans with Disabilities Act. What it means is, if you're holding a business and there's somebody, it's more involved in this, but the way people interact with it mostly. If you run a business or some kind of service and a person needed to get access to your business or service, but they weren't necessarily, they're handicapped, let's say they're in a wheelchair, then there needs to be provisions to allow people to do that. Same thing with working. If you work at a particular company, they need to allow certain provisions to allow you to do your job. And that's necessarily something outrageous. This guy's blind. I don't want him driving the Uber. But definitely minor changes that could be made to accommodate a person who's handicapped in some way. Again, it's more involved than that, but those are the basic and main things. The law that or the bill that these guys are pushing, the Republicans are pushing and pass, attacks the American Disabilities Act. It essentially makes it harder for people to file their cases of saying this particular business is not assisting and allowing me to access a business or service. It's making it more difficult. So something that would take like a month or so in order to resolve, they're dragging it out to, it could take years. It could take years. My question here is, I understand that when Republicans take office, that they are going to be rapacious. They're going to go after workers. They're going to go after Social Security, Medicare. I understand. They're going to be horrible. They're going to be warmongers. I understand that. But why be dicks? Like, why be dicks? Why just be outright cunts? Why behave in this way? Like, I understand you're going to do really nasty stuff to workers. I understand you're going to grind those at the bottom down. I get it. I totally get it. It's your operating system. These guys who are paying you and stuffing money in your G-string and you're, getting your knees dirty in order to serve these guys. I get it. I get it. But this just seems mightily dickish. Of all the people in this society, the people who have it the most difficult are often the disabled. Now, imagine for the moment that you don't have the capacity to go from point A to point B in this kind of glorious movement that we take for granted. Imagine being in a wheelchair. Imagine having some other difficulty where you have difficulty walking or moving or some kind of momentum issue. Imagine you're working at a particular place and you have some minor difficulty that's making your life a living hell. But you're there trying to compete with everyone else who have normal bodies. Is there anything to say for a little bit of empathy? Yeah, there are going to be some people who have it difficult in this society, and yes, we don't want them excluded in the society just for some minor, something that could be overcome by putting some kind of accommodation in for them. I don't think that's too much to ask. That's all I'm saying. With all of the stuff that goes along with being disabled, to have this kind of indignity of not being able to get from point A to point B in the same way that other people can, and to feel excluded by that. Like it's bad enough to be trapped in a body that's this kind of broken avatar in some way, but then you have to also deal with a world that excludes you, that doesn't really care about you, that doesn't even arrange itself in a way that can make accommodations a little bit easier so you can interact with the world in the same way that they do. That's what this is attacking. No, it's not going to take place in a month or two. It's going to take place potentially years. This barrier that's dividing you and the rest of the society. No, you don't need that reminder saying that you're somehow different, but that particular barrier may be there for months and weeks and years. Yes, they can afford to do it. No, they don't have to, because this law allows them to get sketchy on this front. Let me explain the law. Let's see. I'm going to read it from this point because this one is easiest. And by the way, the reason I say it's dickish is, of all the things you want to fuck around with, have you really gotten so far down on your list where you say, you know what? Let's be dicks to the handicap. Let's slap somebody who's disabled. Yes, let's get us out of bed in the morning. If we can pull one nickel on the backs of somebody who's disabled, goddamn, we were gonna pull that nickel. That's how vile and vulgar we are as human beings. That this is the thing we also want to focus our attentions on. This just seems gross. It seems absolutely gross. That being said, Nancy Pelosi was against this. Let me show it. I want you to see it. Come on. Earlier today, House passed the shameful H.R. 620, which undermines the Americans with Disabilities Act and denies discrimination victims access to the courts. Beyond all doubt, it's an insult to the 55 million Americans living with disabilities. You tell him, Nancy. You tell him, Nancy. You know, also though, I hope Nancy also has a conversation with these guys. These are the Democrats that allowed the Republicans to pass this bill. They didn't have the votes to pass the bill without these 12 Democrats adding on to this mix. These 12 Democrats voted to roll back disability rights by 30 years. Shame on them. Pete Algia from California, shame on you. Amy Barrera, shame. Jim Cooper, Luis Correa, shame on you. Henry Correa, and I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but I don't particularly care. You're voting against the interests of people who believe you're representing their interests. Bill Foster, Scott Peters, Collins Peterson, shame. Shame. Kathleen Rice, Kurt Schrader, Jackie Spear, Norma Torres. Shame on all of you. Shame on all of you. California, by the way, Norma Torres, California. Jackie Spear, California. Kurt Schrader, Oregon. Kathleen Rice, New York. Henry Collier, Texas. Bill Foster, Illinois. Scott Peters, California. Colin Peterson, Minnesota. Luis Correa, California. Jim Cooper, Tennessee. Amy Barrera, California. Pete Aguilera, California. Shame. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. You literally voted to hit. Is your voter base for this? Like, all of these Democrats, you helped get this passed. Good job. You helped get this passed. Working with the Republicans to roll back the American Disabilities Act. Shame on you. Let that sit for the moment. Let that sit. Yes, the Republicans did it because Republicans do nasty shit like this all the time. But I have to hear people reciting stuff like you guys are the fucking resistance. You've helped them pass a law that rolls back the American with Disabilities Act. Good job. Good job. This doesn't look like resistance to me. This looks like the opposite of resistance. This looks like you're helping them do things that's making it more difficult for the people who you scream at the top of your lungs that you represent. That's not resistance. Pete Aguilera, yeah, that's not resistance. Amy Barrera, that's not resistance. Jim Cooper from Tennessee. That's not resistance. Luis Carrera. Henry Carrera. Yeah, I'm fucking your name up. I don't care. Bill Foster. Scott Peters. This is not representative of resistance. Colin Peterson. Kathleen Rice. Kurt Schrader. Jackie Spieira. Norma Torres. Norma Torres. This is not indicative of resistance. This is the opposite of resistance. I keep making the point to you that it's both. It's not one or the other. It's both. They allowed this to pass. Small business and regular businesses love this idea because they don't necessarily have to pay for these things. They can essentially push this out, wait it out. Maybe the person will take me to court. Maybe they won't. If they, and at the very least, they can't take me to court immediately right now. And as long as I'm seeming to get something done, if I'm seeming to get something done, I can push this along. I can push this along. That's not resistance. That's the opposite of resistance. Let's talk about the law for a bit. So this is the ACLU. Myths and Truths about the ADA Education Reform Act. That is the most Orwellian fucking name. Just an Orwellian name. Look, if you tell me that it is a burden on businesses to have to actually pay for these things to get done, meaning if a person wants to go into a particular store, it is a burden on a business to do that, I will say to you that to some degree you are correct. Now, the catch here is, I would say that then government should cover this. Meaning, and not government hiring a business to do it. Government itself creates some service, some department, something that goes out and hires people in each of those states to do particular tasks. In this case, that particular task being to make sure that people can get into businesses. That when you're designing a city, you're designing an area, make sure that from the inception of your design that you include people who are handicapped, who may need access, who may need help getting from point A to point B in the way that you've arranged your city and your space. So it's not that I'm hard-hearted to this particular argument. It's just that this is the way this is. Now, if you're telling me that Starbucks can't afford to put a walkway, then I'm going to tell you you are insane. I'm going to tell you you're insane. So it's not that I have a complete tin ear to the business thing, but yeah, it's me balancing the need of somebody who's in a society itself versus the need of the business to save a little money. I'm going to go to the person. The person is more important. And the problem here is you would never take up legislation that says allow the government to do that. So I don't see another option. Either government handles the cost of doing this, either the city is when it's built, it takes these people into accommodation, or the business ends up with it. And to be fair to the business ends up with a lot of fucked up costs, meaning businesses should not be paying for healthcare. That's just something the government should do. I'm just saying, the business is not completely crazy when it says this stuff. In this particular case, though, you leave no other option. It's not something that you would allow the government to do, okay? Because you don't want the government doing that. You don't think it's the government's job to do that. Then that leaves us with a problem. That person needs to get to your store. And from a humanistic perspective, I care about that person a lot more than I care about your profits. So, yes, if government is not going to do it, then it's stuck with the business to do it. And the Americans with Disabilities Act has been here for 30 years. People understand its contours. Businesses understands the contours of what's taking place. It's been in place for 30 years. Now you're going to make it more difficult for people to be able to get from point A to point B. And now you're allowing this kind of exclusion of people in the society itself without an immediate remedy to that exclusion. If we were trying to come together on a position on this, the position I would come to is, fine, let government do it. Let government create a department or a business that handles that particular thing. It would allow people to generate work and jobs and all this other stuff. I am okay with that. But again, what's the compromise? At the end of the day, though, is this the thing that really, of all the problems, of all the things that are addressing us, that are affecting us, is this the thing that really needs to take place? Slapping a guy in a wheelchair, slapping a quadriplegic. Let's take a look at the bill itself. It's just ain't mighty dickish to do. Like, I understand they're like, well, the people who pay us don't like to cover the costs of these items. So yeah, we need to find a way to help the people who pay us. It's too gross to say that we're going to get rid of the American with Disabilities Act, but we can weaken it. We can hurt it. We can nibble away at it year after year after year. This is the first nibble. This will not be the last. I understand this is done purely for their donors. Myth: the the ADA Education and Reform Act strengthens the American with Disabilities Act. That's fucking insane and Orwellian. Truth: the so-called ADA Education and Reform Act weakens the Americans with Disabilities Act and undermines one of the key goals of the law. Title III of the ADA prohibits places of public accommodation like grocery stores or doctor's offices or recreation facilities from discriminating against people with disabilities. If a person with disability encounters an architectural barrier that prevents her from accessing the business, she has 3 options under the ADA: speak with the business, file a complaint with the Department of Justice, or file a lawsuit to provide the law, to the provided under the law. I'm sorry. The ADA Education and Reform Act upends a key provision of the ADA by preventing people with disabilities from immediately going to court to enforce their rights and press for timely removal of the barrier that impedes the access. Without this critical enforcement mechanism, compliance under the ADA will suffer and people with disabilities will be denied the access to which they are entitled under the law. Myth: the ADA Education Reform Act doesn't harm people with disabilities because it merely delays the ability to go to court. The so-called ADA Education Reform Act means that people with disabilities won't have access for weeks, months, or possibly years, and it removes any incentive for the business to comply proactively with the ADA. This change in law would be a boon for businesses at the expense of people with disabilities. They're making the point that they can essentially put off doing these things and increasing the time in which a person with a disability can get access to that business or that service. It's putting barriers in their way without providing an immediate way of getting rid of that particular barrier under the law. Lawsuits under Title III of the ADA expose businesses to big damage rewards for people with disabilities and their lawyers. Truth: there are no money damages under Title III of the ADA. There are zero. That's just a lie. Myth: it's too difficult for businesses, particularly small businesses, to understand their obligation under the ADA. Complying with the ADA is no more burdensome than complying with any other law, and ample resources exist to aid in compliance. Here's this one also, and let me read this part. Businesses must comply with many complex and detailed laws, including tax laws and health and safety laws. Civil rights laws and other laws protecting people with disabilities should not be treated differently. Furthermore, free resources are available to help businesses comply with the ADA. The federal government funds the ADA National Network, which provides free technical assistance to businesses about their responsibilities under ADA. Specifically, there are 10 regional ADA centers that provide individual assistance, in-person trainings, webinars, and publications. There are also tax credits to help businesses remove barriers, including a specific small business tax credit. Right there, then there's no excuse. For all intents and purposes, what I said in the beginning saying, well, wait a minute, if government can help with the cost in this, that's what they're saying already takes place. They already get tax credits. How much did you spend for this particular thing? I spent this much doing this. Okay. Here are tax credits to make you whole. There should be no excuse. At this point, they're just hurting people with disabilities. They're just attacking this bill or this business. This bill. Those tax credits may not be perfect, meaning not pay for all the expenses. So don't get me wrong. All intents and purposes, they're still essentially doing this, hurting people with disabilities for their donors. Understand the only people who this benefits are people who are business owners. Oh man, it's a pain in my ass to have to comply with the ADA in this way. Okay. Give us a quarter, give us $1, give us millions of dollars, and we'll go out and advocate for you. And we will attack laws that are somewhat of a pain in your ass just because you don't want to deal with those things. benefiting regular human beings. You want to keep your dollars in your pocket, and we want to help you keep your dollars in your pockets. So we will advocate for you, and we will attack things like the Americans with Disabilities Act. Fuck the handicap. Fuck the handicap. That's essentially what this law is. Fuck the handicap. Mind you, at the expense of businesses. At the expense of businesses. Businesses are saying, I don't want to do this, man. At least Republican businesses. I don't want to abide by these things. These things are a pain in my ass. Is there any way you can help me? Hey, we can help you by essentially weakening this law. We can hurt this law. And in hurting this law, we can put off the money that you would have to spend on this particular thing. We can put it off for months. We can put it off for maybe even years. And hell, maybe the person doesn't even fight it at this point when they realize they can't necessarily have an immediate remedy for this particular thing. Fuck the handicap. Fuck the handicap. And understand at whose expense. I mean, not at whose expense. Who's benefiting at this from the expense of the handicaps. I'm saying this poorly. The ADA Education and Reform Act is necessary to stop lawyers who abuse the ADA by filing frivolous lawsuits. The so-called ADA Education and Reform Act would do nothing to stop frivolous lawsuits, and there are ways to address the problem of unscrupulous attorneys without placing unwarranted burdens on the rights of people with disabilities. I'll leave it at this. This video has gone too long. This is just gross. That's all. That's all. It's like you've had something in place for 30 years. It's been doing exactly what it was supposed to do. People understood what it was supposed to do. And Republicans come in and says, you know what we need to do today? We need to go after the disabled. We need to go after the disabled. And then you had a few Democrats who said, these guys are right. We need to go after the disabled. We need to help small businesses not assist in making a fairer society. We need to help small businesses allow barriers to stay up for people who have some level of disability. Fuck their access. I need to keep my dollars. That's what took place with HR 620. And once again, these are the Democrats that allowed this to pass. Shame on them. Pete Aguilar of California, Amy Barrera of California, Jim Cooper of Tennessee, Luis Correa of California, Henry Cuellar. Dude, this name, man. I'm sorry. I may be, culturally insensitive, but this name is intense. Henry Cuellar. I'll go with that. Bill Foster from Illinois, Scott Peters, California, Colin Peterson, Minnesota, Norma Torres of California, Jackie Spear of California, Kurt Schrader of Oregon, Kathleen Rice of New York. Shame on you indeed. You allowed this shit to pass. It would have died here in the house. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. I'll keep a look at this to see what it does in the Senate. Just because it passes the House doesn't necessarily mean it passes. I guess my point is, what does it mean to have resistance if you're not actually resisting? If you're not resisting, you had a chance to kill something that is literally going to attack the people who you say you represent. Democratic Party allowed this to pass. I'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys.